I'm working on repairing a hutch right now that has a lot of screw holes covered up by wood plugs. In order to do the repair, I need to get those screws out, so I need to remove the wood plugs. This is an example of a door that has wood plugs in it. I'm going to show you how to extract those wood plugs, repair the door, put the wood plugs back together again. Now, the wood plugs that are covering this, they need to match the existing finish, and that's more challenging than working with new wood where you can finish the whole piece at one time. So I'm going to show you how to extract these, put them in, and disguise them so they're as good as new.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
What I need to do is take that apart, repair it, and put it back together so I can get this chair in working order.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
The way these doors are constructed is, along the stile here, there's a screw that goes into the rail. So there's one here, and I've got wood plugs covering those screws. Now before I attempt to take this apart, let me show you how these are used. So here's a scrap piece of wood, and this is the wood plug. So what I'm going to do is drill a hole. This is a drill for a pilot hole and a countersink, and the width of that countersink will allow that wood plug to go in. I can now take the wood plug and insert it into the hole. Now these are tapered plugs, and I only get about 1/4 of an inch in that hole before it's snug all the way around. And that's what I'm going to do here, is take out about 1/4 of an inch of material. And what I want to do is make sure I preserve the edges of that hole so they're nice and clean and sharp. They're not damaged at all. And that way I can reinsert plugs into that hole and get a nice tight fit. When I stand up this door and look at the plug, I want you to notice something. You can see here the grain in the plug is running on an angle. It should be the same as the grain here, and that way they tend to blend in more. So what I'm going to do here is drill a hole right in the center of that plug. I'm now going to use a number 8 screw to screw through the plug and hit the metal in the screw, and that will drive the plug out. Now you can see how easily that plug comes out. The key to doing this is making sure you're not putting pressure on the hole, so you need to have the right size screw with the right size drill bit. I use a number 8 screw and a 7/64 inch drill bit. The way to check that is to put your drill bit in front of the screw, and you want that drill bit to be the same size as the shaft, so you should only be seeing the threads. Now the advantage of pulling out the plugs this way is I have nice crisp edges on this hole, so I can put a new plug in here when I'm done and conceal that hole as best as possible. Now you might be wondering why I'm taking this door apart. I'm going to hold this here and move it back and forth. Look at that movement. This door is about 35 years old, and it's seen a lot of movement over the years. It's being held together with a screw here, and down at the corners as well. But this makes me wonder about the longevity of pocket hole screws. They seem to be working well now, but will they last over the decades? I'm not so sure. I'd love to hear your comments. Leave them below. I'm going to take this door apart, and then I can put it back together, and we'll get to filling the holes with the plugs. The glue's dried in the door, and I've taken it out of the clamps, and now we can work on putting the plugs in. Now, these are called wood plugs in the furniture industry, but in the shipbuilding industry, they're called bungs. Exactly the same. You might see them on a teak deck, covering up stainless steel screws. So to insert this, I've got a tapered plug, meaning it's narrower at the bottom than it is at the top, and that way it easily goes in the hole, and as I push it down, I get a nice tight fit. The other thing you need to do is orient the grain so that it matches the grain pattern of the surrounding wood, and that way it is concealed as best possible. Some plugs, inexpensive plugs, are end grain, and you don't end up getting that grain matching, so you're looking for face grain. Now I make these, and I'll show you how I do that in a few minutes, but first of all, let's get these glued in. My tool cabinet's not done yet, but it's certainly giving me good storage for things like my brushes. Gluing in the plug's pretty easy. It's just a matter of taking a little bit of glue, rolling it around on the sides, just like that, and then inserting it. So again, I want to make sure that I've got that grain oriented the right way, and then just tap it home with a hammer. You don't want to push it in too much to split the wood, but you do want a nice snug fit. On this hutch, I've got dozens of these wood plugs to put in. I'll show you some on the side. In this cabinet, these joints had broken apart because someone had screwed through into a solid backing, and the wood movement destroyed the cabinet. So I've taken it all apart, glued it back together, and I've secured it at the front here, so I've got a nice tight joint. And here there are no screws in these. I've got a bracket at the back that allows wood movement. So I'll just fill these holes, and then I can come back and trim them. Now before I trim off these wood plugs, I'm going to show you how I make these. Wood plugs are easy to make if you've got the right cutter. There are several different styles out there. The one I like the most has 4 cutting heads on it, and it makes a tapered plug but also puts a rounded end on it, and that way it's very easy to insert it into a hole. Now if you've got your own plug cutter, you can control the material. Most of the time you want to match the material that you're using. In this case, I've got a cherry blank here, and I'm just cutting these out to match the cherry cabinet. But you might also be interested in doing something with some contrasting woods, such as maple and cherry together. I'm going to put this in the drill press and show you how it works. We can now bring this back to the bench and use a chisel to pop these out. Now when you pop them out, if they end up coming out with an angle like that, it's just a matter of squaring them up. When you hit this with a hammer, it's going to want to twist, so you want a flat head on the end. So I just use the chisel to square it up. Just like that. If you're making a large batch of these, you can make them much faster if you cut the plugs, put tape across here, and then run that through the table saw to get nice square edges on the top end of the plugs. Now I can't do that with this board. It's a warped board and it's not square, so it's dangerous to run that through a saw. I'm just breaking them off as I go. So let's get to trimming the plugs. If you're working on building a piece where you've got raw wood, this is relatively easy. So all I need to do is glue this in place, and I'm just going to tap this in here to demonstrate. And then use a flush cut saw to cut this off level. You just need to sand that and you're good to go. Now with this door, I've got a finished surface, and with the cabinet as well, I want to make sure I'm not marring up any of the surface. So I'm going to clamp this in here and show you how I do this with chisels. Now, no matter the quality of the flush cut saw, I don't trust it not to leave the slightest scratch on a finished surface. So what I do is I use a chisel and take it down so it's close to the edge. So I'm going to get down close enough and then get rid of the mallet and start paring it by hand. Now you can only do this with a really sharp chisel. You need to make sure you've got good honing going on. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So the technique I'm using is I'm using the back of the chisel to guide that I've got a nice clean cut, and then I just have to tilt it up slightly to make sure I'm cutting the plug and not the surrounding wood. Now just to show you in real time how quick this is, just take off a couple layers and then pare it by hand. All done. Now this process works well because I'm able to use the back of the chisel to guide cutting that wood plug. But you can see here I've got a handle that gets in the way if I'm working in the middle of the cabinet. I've got a different process for that, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, to get a really sharp chisel, you need to make sure that you're using a strop. This has honing compound on one side, and it's a leather strop, and the honing compound acts as an abrasive, but it's very, very fine. Once finished on that, move over to just the plain leather side to make sure you get a really polished edge. There's no way that you could do work like this without a really sharp chisel, and I'll show you how easy that is. On the strop, you need to make sure you've got the right angle in the chisel, and once you get used to this, you can actually feel it. So I just put it down the surface here, feel where that angle is, and then pull it back. I do this 30 times, and then I'll do it once on the back just to clear off any potential burr. And then flip it over on this side and do the exact same thing. Feel for that angle. And then move it across 30 times. And then at the very end, just run the back on it. Now, let's see if I can catch the reflection. So here's a close-up. If I move that forward, I'm recording this on an iPhone. Can you see the lens? That is a mirror finish. So as I mentioned, I can't use the back of this for reference, so I have to use the bevel this way to do the work. Now when you're breaking these off, if you break them off sideways, so the grain's going this way, if I break it off sideways, I'll show you what happens. Oh, that I just cut through. Try it again. What you end up doing is the grain can drive deeper, and the risk of cutting it off this way is you could break off the grain inside where you want that plug to be level. So it's always best to go this way with the grain. So there I'm getting close. Okay, so that's as close as I get with using the mallet, and now I have to use that bevel and gauge where I'm cutting. And it helps if you use a bit of a slicing motion as well. But the trick here is, if I lean too far forward, I'm going to be cutting into the cabinet. So I need to make sure I'm not digging too deep. And there we go. So, nice and flush. I just have to deal with the challenge of matching the color to the cabinet. The last step to conceal these plugs is to put on finish, and I'm using an acrylic called Saman, and I found this antique walnut is a pretty good match for the finish. Acrylics are great because they let you control the depth of color. So if I'm putting this on here and it's too dark, I can just wipe off a bunch of that color. So they're really good in terms of being able to repair pieces and disguise flaws and changes that you've made to the furniture. Just need to put some urethane on top, and that should virtually disappear. The stain's dried on the wood plugs, so I can now use a urethane to cover up these and give it the same finish as the cabinet. Now I'm using water-based urethane because if I use oil-based, it might change the color of that over time, and I want it to match. So I'll show you how this is done. So all this is really doing is putting a sheen on top. It's not really changing the color of it. So I just need to make sure I stay within the lines of the plug, and then I'm good. So here are the two plugs, here and here. And you can see that now that the polyurethane is dried, it goes on rather white, but it dries clear. Please give this video a thumbs up. It helps other people find our videos. I hope you learned something useful about wood plugs today, or bungs. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you can click over here, click on the bell icon, and you'll get notified every time I release a video. Thanks for watching Fixing Furniture.